when it comes to the coronavirus and this latest variant, including those new restrictions in Wales after Christmas. And we'll be looking at the impact of the Australian free trade deal for British farmers. That and so much more in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's get the news at 3 with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date at 3 o'clock. The First Minister of Wales has announced the country will move to COVID alert level 2 from Boxing Day. The measures include 2 metres social distancing in public and places of work. The rule of 6 is being reintroduced in pubs, restaurants, cinemas and theatres. Face coverings will be required in hospitality settings at all times, apart from when seated. There's also going to be a limit on the number of people attending large events. 30 people indoors, 50 people outside.
Now, nobody wanted to see the return to alert levels and to the protections that I've announced today. But we are now entering a really serious phase of the pandemic. Wales will reopen after Christmas. But in order to do so safely, we have to do everything we can to go on protecting ourselves and taking care of others.
In England, the self-isolation period for fully vaccinated people who test positive for COVID-19 has been cut from 10 days to 7. Those infected with the virus must produce a negative lateral flow result on day 6 and day 7 of the isolation period, and then they can leave. The Health Secretary says this will help thousands of people enjoy Christmas with their families. Well, it comes as the Prime Minister says Christmas in England will go ahead as planned, but new measures could be brought in after. The Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, John Ashworth, told us businesses, though, need clarity.
Everybody is anticipating that something will happen after Christmas. Indeed, that's the briefing from the government sources to newspapers. Briefings to newspapers isn't good enough. I think we just need some clarity about what the financial package will be and what the restrictions are likely to look like post-Christmas in the run-up to New Year's Eve. We can't leave people in limbo.
A new formulation of the Pfizer COVID jab has been approved for use in the UK for vulnerable children aged 5 to 11. It's the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Agency that's given the green light to the jab after a review showed it was safe to use. They've said those within this age bracket who are seen at risk or in contact with those in vulnerable groups should be offered a first dose. Further advice regarding the jab for other children is expected in due course. The UK's chief medical officers have praised NHS staff for their tireless work during the pandemic. They're warning, though, of tough winter months ahead. They're urging staff to prepare for multiple challenges as hospital admissions with the Omicron variant are rising rapidly. The chief executive of King's College Hospital in London is also concerned at the number of COVID-related staff shortages.
We were at around about 100 or so COVID-related staff absences about 10, 11 days ago, and that figure is now over 600. Staff are coping, partly because they know they have to cope. They're professionals, they're clinical professionals, they're outstanding people, and they're doing what they have been trained to do, but it's difficult.
The UK economy has grown at a much slower pace than first thought between July and September of this year. The Office for National Statistics said the economy expanded by 1.1% in the third quarter, compared with initial estimates of 1.3%. Experts expect the economy to shrink further in December as new COVID restrictions may be introduced. Manchester City footballer Benjamin Mendy has been accused of another count of rape. The charge relates to a new complainant and is alleged to have taken place this July. The 27-year-old Frenchman appeared at Chester Crown Court this morning. He's been in custody since August. He's now accused of 7 counts of rape relating to 4 women. A government minister in Madagascar has said he swam for 12 hours after his helicopter crashed at sea during a rescue mission. Serge Guélé, who leads the National Gendarmerie, was with a team searching the northeast coast of the country after a cargo ship illegally carrying 138 passengers sank. At least 64 people have died, 24 people are missing, 50 people were found. You're up to date. We'll have more for you in half an hour. Right now, the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
A very good afternoon, hello and welcome to the Briefing PM, your fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis here on GB News. I'm Darren McCaffrey and here's what's coming up over the next hour for you. Self-isolation rules have changed in England, with infected people now able to end their quarantine after 7 days instead of 10 if they test negative twice. It comes as the Prime Minister, of course, said there will be no new restrictions brought in for England before Christmas, but the possibility remains that they could see further measures next week. We'll have all the latest on the coronavirus crisis and what it means across the nations as ministers also meet in Northern Ireland this afternoon. We'll have the latest from Stormont. Also, we'll be joined by the chair of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, Neil Parish, to discuss how the brand new free trade deal with Australia is impacting British farmers. And with outdoor sporting events in Scotland, essentially not going to have a big audience, maximum of 500 people in attendance from Boxing Day. We'll get the thoughts from football fans north of the border. As always on the briefing, we'll hear what you've got to say, particularly Tony Blair today, the former Prime Minister, suggesting that if you're not vaccinated and you're eligible, you're not just irresponsible, you're an idiot. What do you think about that? And indeed, any of the other stories today, get in touch. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. It is a Wednesday afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the programme. Well, the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has announced that people infected with COVID in England can now stop self-isolating from day 7. It means that millions of people actually will have a Christmas potentially that was in doubt. This is provided, though, that they've got 2 negative lateral flow tests, results on day 6 and 7. The guidance applies to everyone currently in isolation, regardless of the vaccination status. The Prime Minister, of course, yesterday said there will be no new restrictions in England before Christmas, but, and it is a big but, he is not ruling out, says it's finally balanced the suggestion that we could see restrictions imposed from next week over the new year. Many celebrations in London, Scotland and elsewhere have already been cancelled. Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who is in the studio with the latest this afternoon. Tom, a lot to get through. Let's start, first of all, with a major announcement in the last hour or so when it comes to the vaccines for younger kids.
That's right. For the first time, 5 to 11-year-olds in the United Kingdom have been approved to be able to have the vaccine. Now, there are some caveats to this. The MHRA has approved the vaccine. The JCVI, however, has said that it's only the most vulnerable 5 to 11-year-olds who should be getting it at this stage. So that's those who are clinically vulnerable, at clinical risk, but also those 5 to 11-year-olds who live with immunosuppressed people. They will also be offered the vaccine. There's a slight difference in the vaccine as well. Instead of the ordinary 30 microgram dose that everyone aged 12 and above is able to get, this will be a 10 microgram dose of the vaccine, so 1/3 as strong as older children. That's the current state of play. However, it is likely that this may well be expanded beyond just the vulnerable 5 to 11-year-olds. Of course, we've seen that in other countries. It seems to be the case that in this country we are rather lagging behind many countries on the continent, and indeed America, Canada, other OECD countries that have approved this earlier.
And talking about the wider vaccine programme, 968,665 boosters delivered yesterday. That beats the blockbuster that we saw on Saturday. We're almost getting to 1 million a day. And this is important, isn't it, when it comes to restrictions, because the evidence suggests not only are you less likely to end up in hospital or indeed have severe illness if you've been boosted, but also that you are far less likely to even catch the virus.
That's right, and less likely to pass it on. Now, we do know that of course you can catch it and you can pass it on if you're vaccinated, but you're less likely to. And it's that reduction in likelihood that makes a real difference and that can really slow the spread of this virus. We know the one big risk that politicians are worried about is if everyone gets the virus at the same time. And if everyone gets the virus at the same time, that could pose a risk to the NHS, which has a limited number of beds. However, if we can spread out the amount of time at which people get this virus, if you're less likely to pass it on, if people get this virus over several months rather than over several weeks, that puts us in a much better stead. That means we may not need those non-pharmaceutical intervention, those restrictions on our lives in order to stop the NHS from being overwhelmed.
And just very finally, this all feeds in, of course, until potentially Parliament meeting next week. We don't know that for certain. The Prime Minister saying it is finally balanced. But it seems like that balance may have tipped slightly in recent days away from restrictions to a degree. Studies, and a new one has just come out this afternoon from South Africa, in which they essentially are saying it is less severe. We've got the booster programme on boosters, if you like. In addition to that, the cases don't seem to be, and we'll get the figures, of course, for yesterday later on in the next couple of hours, don't seem to be quite as increasing as much as we had thought, i.e. people are regulating their activity.
Yes.
Is it possible that actually Parliament might not meet next week, that England might stick on the course it currently is in?
That is certainly a possibility. I think the most important note of all of those points is that in London specifically, it seems like there's been a bit of a plateau in those cases. Now, clearly, a lot of that will have been the way that people have been regulating their own behaviour, these sort of voluntary lockdowns that people have been doing. Now, that's been awful for the hospitality sector in London. The number of cancelled bookings, the restaurants, the bars, the pubs, the theatres, all of these industries are suffering. But the virus isn't growing as quickly as it may well have done, all other things being equal. So that is a relatively good point, but also we're fortunate in that even though there are these 40-odd mutations within Omicron, 3 doses of the same vaccine do work against it. 2 not so good, but 3 do work against it. We haven't had to design an entirely new vaccine for this. There are some silver linings to this, and of course that data out of South Africa, potentially up to 70% less harmful,
severe,
less severe for individuals. So maybe, just maybe, there is some light at the end of this tunnel without those restrictions. However, we did not know Omicron existed even a month ago.
Indeed.
We don't have a lot of data. That's the problem.
Indeed, and that's why the government's insisting we need to wait for it, though, of course, critics was accused that might be too late, but we will find out. Tom, thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood there. We'll be coming back to Tom a little later in the programme for a sense of what's happening elsewhere in the UK, outside of England. But let's stick with England for the time being, and let's speak to Greg Smith. He is the Conservative MP for Buckinghamshire. Greg, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Where's your sense of where we're at the moment when it comes to the tests the government have set about potentially changing restrictions here in England?
Well, I think the news that you've just shared that's coming out of South Africa that shows the virus does look to be less severe than previous strains of COVID, here in this country, we are not seeing those doomsday numbers that we were told were going to happen, the 200,000 infections a day, when we were asked to vote on the Plan B restrictions last week. I think actually the outlook has got to be pretty good. And then when you couple that with the sheer volume of booster jabs going into people's arms on a daily basis, just shy of the 1 million mark, the boosters, the vaccines are our golden ticket. They are the beacon of hope that are going to get us through this. And I think we need to be putting all of our eggs in the vaccines basket, encouraging everyone that hasn't yet done so to get their booster, or if they haven't had their initial jabs, to get their initial jabs. That is the path to ensure that we're not going to be in ruinous restrictions come Boxing Day, as they look like they will be in Scotland and Wales.
We know that, of course, the NHS is already under an awful lot of pressure. It is every winter, but it does seem more severe this winter. Hospitalisations in London, which has been the epicentre so far with this latest variant, are up 41% in a week. I mean, the fear, of course, is amongst many of the scientists, and the scientists advising the government, is that if we wait for this data, it'll be too late, that hospitals will be overwhelmed, that maybe it's right to be cautious.
But as Tom said, when you were talking to him a few moments ago, actually the data in London, it is too early to say, but it does look like it's plateauing. And I think we've got to accept that the heroes in our NHS, who are all working incredibly hard and have done throughout their whole careers, but certainly for the last couple of years throughout this pandemic, they are stretched at winter time. That happens every single year, and we're actually not seeing the sort of flu numbers that we would normally see. I'm not saying flu's gone away, but we're not seeing the sheer level of flu numbers that we ordinarily would at this time of year. So the way that we can protect our NHS and stop it becoming overwhelmed is to ensure that we all get the protection that the vaccine brings us. I was boosted on Monday. My wife was boosted yesterday. I would encourage absolutely everybody to go and get that jab, because that is what will stop you becoming seriously ill with COVID. and putting that strain on the NHS were you to need hospital treatment.
I agree with the former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, who said if you don't get vaccinated and you're eligible, you're not just irresponsible, you're an idiot.
Look, I've had all 3 jabs. Everyone in my family's had all 3 jabs. I encourage everybody to do the right thing and to get vaccinated. I'm not going to throw insults around because there are some people that have legitimate concerns, and I think it's better that they talk to GPs, they talk to healthcare professionals about their concerns, and hopefully can be talked round by the clinicians, by the professionals, as to why the vaccines are safe and why the vaccines will save lives and ensure that people don't become seriously ill with COVID if they catch it.
You know what critics of the Prime Minister will say, though, that in the end, actually, rather than listening to the scientists, maybe which he should be doing and which he has said throughout this pandemic he will be led by, in fact, he's led by party management. He's concerned about MPs like you and how they may well vote in Parliament rather than doing what potentially is necessary when it comes to public health.
Well, it's my job as a backbench member of Parliament to hold the government to account. Yeah, it might be a government that's run by my own party, but it's the job of all backbench MPs to hold the government to account, to ask the difficult questions, to scrutinise the data. And we're already in a position where Parliament was asked to vote for Plan B a couple of last week on the basis of there being 200,000 infections a day. Well, we're less than half of that. And we've got to be absolutely certain that what the data is showing isn't worst case scenario modelling presented as fact, and that we also take into account all of the other harms that restrictions bring, both to other health conditions. You know, the cancer backlog absolutely petrifies me where we are on that as we come into almost the 2-year mark of this pandemic. The impact on mental health, the impact on the economy. Businesses in my constituency, not just hospitality, but across the piece, massively suffering, tens of thousands of pounds worth of cancellations every day. We have to have this in balance. And it's my job as a backbench member of Parliament to scrutinise both what the government presents as fact off the back of some scientific modelling and the rest of the impact on British society.
And just very finally, Greg, before we let you go, let's be clear about this. If nothing changes in the next couple of days, if cases don't seem to be rising that much here in the UK, if the evidence from South Africa is still pretty good, and if the booster programme carries on as it is, if the Prime Minister wants to impose new restrictions in England, it seems that you're pretty clear that you would vote against that.
As it stands today, I voted against Plan B last week. As it stands today, I think we need to be just focusing on the vaccines, focusing on giving people that protection in themselves against this virus. You know, I'm not going to commit to how I would vote next week if we do get recalled right now. But as it stands, I can't see how I could back further restrictions as I didn't back restrictions last week.
OK, Greg Smith, appreciate your time. Merry Christmas to you. Stay safe. Thank you very much, Greg Smith, there, the Conservative MP for Buckinghamshire. OK, right, we're going to take a quick break here on GB News and The Briefing. Up next, we're actually going to be looking at the Australian free trade deal. How good is it or bad for British farmers? Plus, we'll be taking you around the country for the very latest on the restrictions that are being imposed in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. We're expecting an announcement, actually, from Stormont within the next hour or so. That and so much more in just a couple of minutes. But first, let's get up to date with the weather. Is it going to snow on Christmas Day? Let's find out.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again, good afternoon. Well, we've got a change underway now across the UK with some rain pushing in. As it bumps into the colder air across Scotland, we've got a risk of some ice here, but generally speaking, over the next few days, it's breezier and less cold, at least in the south. Now, the milder air is tied in with these weather fronts pushing their way in from the Atlantic, which is dislodging the area of high pressure that's been with us for the last few days and setting the scene for a more changeable and unsettled theme for the next few days. We've got the rain then pushing its way northwards across Scotland this evening. The ice risk are tied in with this and perhaps some snow across the mountains of northern Scotland as well. Elsewhere, though, the rain will sweep through, and then we're left with a lot of cloud around, a few clear spells, but on the whole, quite cloudy skies to end the night, and it won't be as cold as it was last night. An early dip in temperatures across some eastern areas of England, but generally speaking, those temperatures coming up from the southwest as we start Thursday. So we've got quite a wet start, though, across parts of Scotland through Thursday. The rain here will tend to peter out for a time before it gets caught up by this next band of rain working its way in from the southwest. Not much rain across England and Wales, I don't think, from this, but certainly for parts of northern England, perhaps Northern Ireland, certainly for Scotland, quite a wet day to come with quite persistent rain by the afternoon, and potentially some more snow developing across the mountains of Scotland. Milder in the south, but colder elsewhere still. Then a wet night to come for Thursday night into Friday. Potentially quite significant amounts of snow across the mountains of Scotland, so something to bear in mind if you're travelling in this part of the world. Elsewhere, though, it will be largely dry to take us into Christmas Eve morning, although with some clear skies and a now damp ground, best before some fog patches to develop. Quite a mild night, though, certainly in comparison to many recent nights, temperatures staying in double figures towards the southwest. So Christmas Eve will start off on a fairly grey and murky note, perhaps some dense fog patches, which will be slow to clear across central southern parts of England on Christmas Eve. Next batch of rain, though, waiting in the wings. This sets the scene then for quite an unsettled Christmas period, with certainly a risk of some rain across many parts of the country at times, and with temperatures quite low in the north, there's a chance of some snow too.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK, the world, and our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We're here for you. Don't forget to join our community by hitting the subscribe button.
And download the GB News app so you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
Very welcome back to the briefing on this Wednesday afternoon. Time coming up to 3:30. Thank you for your company. Today we're talking about vaccinations, obviously the coronavirus crisis, asking what you make of former Prime Minister Tony Blair's comment on the radio a little earlier today, in which he said that if you're not vaccinated and you're eligible, you're not just irresponsible, you're an idiot. What do you think about that? Do you agree with Tony Blair or vehemently disagree? Do get in touch. You know the email address, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at gbnews. We'll get to some of your views. I'm sure you've got a view on that a little later on in the programme. But let's move away temporarily, if we can, from coronavirus and talk about trade, because the UK, of course, has signed a free trade deal with Australia last week. It removes tariffs on all UK exports. And according to the government, it's expected to unlock £10.4 billion of additional trade. However, some reports claim that the UK's agriculture and food sectors will suffer a £94 million hit from the agreement. Let's talk to Neil Parish. He is a Conservative MP for Tiverton and Honiton and is the chair of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee. Neil, very good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
First of all, what's your general view on this? Is this trade deal good for British farmers? Doesn't seem like it from the stats.
No, I mean, it's mixed, I think. And what we're really concerned about is the conditions of trade, making sure that the animal welfare conditions, the environmental conditions are very similar to what's being produced in Australia to here. I mean, the actual trade deal is a good one in as much that, China is flexing her muscles. It's good to have closer cooperation with Australia and then New Zealand. But, poultry, they're much more densely populated, use more antibiotics. The conditions are not as good. Travelling of the livestock, 40 hours in lorries, whereas we're restricted to 12, probably bringing it down to 8. We're driving our standards up. So just keen to make sure that as we trade sheep, again, there's a problem with them. They sort of take the skin off, the wool off the back of sheep so that they don't get fly strike. But of course, the New Zealanders have banned this because of animal welfare concerns. So I think Australia will need to do the same. So, let's trade on equal basis. I mean, they are great friends of ours, but, I am conscious that we don't want to trade away our very good high standards of farming in this country and animal welfare.
Well, it's not even trading away our high standards. I mean, many people think, why the hell are we sending food literally to the other side of the planet when we've moved away from a deal with the EU, who are our neighbours? I mean, trade with Ireland has fallen through the floor in the last couple of years. I mean, how does it make any sense for the environment, for food standards, for food quality that, we now have to search to the other side of the planet to stop selling our food to?
Yeah, I mean, I think naturally it depends on how the food gets here. If it gets here by ship, there is sort of some of the environmental concerns aren't as big, but food miles is a problem. And I think this will be part of the thing that I will want to look at when we look at the trade deal to make sure that we're not only looking at the conditions of trade, the production in Australia, but the distance it travels here. We will then export more. As we've left the EU, I mean, the trade deals will come about. And so British agriculture, we are competitive, but we are only competitive if we can trade like with like. And I think that is the issue for lots of farmers. Crop protection, all of these things that perhaps the Australians use that we're not allowed to use here. It all reduces their costs and it adds cost to our production. That is what I'm particularly interested in. I think the consumer wants to buy good British food. They don't want to see it travel so far. Good labelling. I don't think there's going to be such a huge demand necessarily in the retailers and supermarkets, but there will be some of our big catering outlets where they have to be very competitive on price, steaks and the like. You will be, I suspect, eating Australian steaks when you go out.
Well, I look forward to that. Can we just make?
You've got to enjoy a British one better, I'm afraid.
Well,
but anyway,
always shop British and always shop local is my motto, if you can. Neil, just while we've got you, can we just ask just very briefly on coronavirus? You voted for Plan B last week. At the moment, do you think the Prime Minister is making the right call in essentially doing nothing in the lead up to Christmas when it comes to COVID restrictions?
Yeah, I think I voted for Plan B because we needed to slow things down. I think the public, my constituents are largely, being more cautious, more careful. And I think that's the right direction to go. And I think we do have to look, I was listening to Greg earlier on, he's sort of in a slightly different position on those rules. But you see, I actually thought that bringing in a bit more restrictions on nightclubs and others would actually encourage some of our younger people to get vaccinated, because vaccines are the key. So I think the rules are just about right at the moment. I agree with Greg that we will look at the statistics. I mean, if the situation in London does plateau, and we are very hard pressed, NHS is coping, then I believe we probably won't be recalled, and I suspect these restrictions will remain roughly the same. But of course, and again, if it's not as infectious, or it's not as infectious, but if it's not so much hospitalisation with this variant, then I think that's also has to be taken in consideration. So largely speaking, I think I'm pleased that I voted for what I did before Christmas, but I am very keen to see the absolute data before we do any further, because you see, your business is so badly affected. I'm glad the Chancellor has brought some money in for the hospitality sector, because I was in the Tiverton Hotel on Monday. I was there for an hour and a half meeting various farmers and others, talking about policy and stuff, and nobody else came in the Tiverton Hotel while we were there. So you can see, people are slowing down.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely are. I'm sure that's anecdotal across the country. And just very finally, simply because I'm asking everyone this today, but Tony Blair earlier on branding people who have not taken the vaccine as irresponsible and idiots. Do you agree?
I think previous prime ministers always have the luxury of being able to say what they like. I would encourage everybody to get it, and I think just younger people, please just think that you will be mixing probably with your grandparents and others. Please get your vaccines. I think it's best to coax people into getting them rather than driving them in there. And so I wouldn't altogether go along with Tony Blair, but I think, I do want everybody to get it, because if we can get our vaccines out and get most people vaccinated, then we have a chance to keep going and get through this outbreak. But without it, you will spread COVID, and it's a bit selfish, basically. And I think, just think about the rest of the population, please, not just yourself. Because some young people are a bit macho, especially young men, and I can understand perhaps why, but, just think of the whole of your family and your friends, please, and go and get your vaccine. That's my advice to you all.
OK, Neil, thank you very much. Enjoy the farmhouse. Merry Christmas to you and to all your family. Neil Parish, our Conservative MP, joining us from Somerset. OK, we're going to pause there on GB News. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, we're going to get the latest situation, because it's clearly not the same in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. They are imposing restrictions after Christmas. We'll get the details of that. And also, how is Liz Truss going to change Brexit negotiations? We'll be discussing that and much more in the next 30 minutes. But first, just after 3:30, here is the news with Rosie.
I'm Rosie Wright. Good afternoon. Here are the latest headlines. The First Minister of Wales has announced that the country will move to COVID alert level 2 from Boxing Day. The measures include 2 metre social distancing in public and places of work. The rule of 6 has been brought back for pubs, restaurants, cinemas and theatres. Face coverings will be required in hospitality settings when moving around. There's also going to be a limit on the number of people who are allowed to attend large events. 30 people indoors, 50 outside. A new formulation of the Pfizer COVID jab has been approved for use in vulnerable children in the UK, aged from 5 to 11. Well, it's the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Agency that's given the green light to the jab after a review showed it was safe. They've said those within this age bracket who are seen as risk or those in contact with those in vulnerable groups should be offered a first dose. Further advice regarding the jab for other children is expected in due course. A deputy head teacher has pleaded guilty at Liverpool Crown Court to 18 child sex abuse offences, including 2 counts of rape. Julie Morris admitted filming herself and her partner raping a girl under the age of 13. The 44-year-old had been the safeguarding lead at her school in Wigan, but the offences do not relate to her employment. Morris will be sentenced later today. A government minister in Madagascar has said he swam for 12 hours after his helicopter crashed at sea during a rescue mission. Sergei Gele, who leads the National Gendarmerie, said he was with his team searching the northeast coast of the country after a cargo ship illegally carrying 138 passengers sank. At least 64 people have been killed, 24 are missing, 50 survivors were found. We'll have a full update for you at 4 o'clock.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. Wales is introducing a new alert level 2 of restrictions for hospitality settings, theatres and cinemas, kicking in at 6 a.m. on Boxing Day. The new measures were announced this afternoon by the Welsh First Minister, Mark Trafford. Let's have a listen.
A general requirement of a 2-metre social distancing in all premises open to the public and in workplaces, subject to that test of reasonable measures. The rule of 6 will apply to gatherings in regulated premises, such as hospitality, cinemas and theatres. All licensed premises will need to take additional measures to protect customers and staff, including table service and collecting contact details. Face coverings will be required in hospitality settings at all times apart from when seated. Large events will not be able to go ahead indoors or outdoors. The maximum number of people who can gather at an indoor event will be set at 30, and 50 people will be able to meet outdoors. There will be an exception for team sports, where up to 50 spectators will be able to gather in addition to those taking part, and there will be an exception, as previously, for events involving children.
Well, people attending weddings and funerals will need a negative lateral flow test, and the amount of people allowed will depend on the venue. Drakeford also said that there will be no legal rules being brought in to cover people mixing in houses and in private gardens. Well, let's get the latest on the restrictions in Wales and indeed around the country. Tom Harwood is with us, our political correspondent. Tom, good afternoon again. What's Mark Drakeford's rationale for these restrictions in Wales?
Well, at the start of his statement today, Mark Drakeford went over in quite some detail the scale of the case growth in Wales and the number of new cases each day that are being detected. It's quite clear there is a surge in cases. What's less clear is how well that will translate into hospitalisation and death. It's early days in this Omicron epidemic. However, the argument of Mark Drakeford and indeed the argument of Nicola Sturgeon is that in the face of uncertainty, deploy the precautionary principle, because by the time you have full data, it may well be too late to act. This is a risk in their view, the delay that Boris Johnson is having, waiting until potentially next week before making the move. They're making the move now, but it's quite a big move. And to be fair to Boris Johnson, there are risks in restricting activity between individuals, in ruining people's New Year's, in decimating the business for
or just on
a
practical basis, that people move away from potentially kind of socially distant organised pubs and end up in people's homes, where that not might be the case. I think also the argument, if we move to Scotland, because obviously Nicola Sturgeon introduced or has announced new restrictions there yesterday, again after Christmas. And I think the point, and we hear from this from the Labour Party as well, is about providing some form of certainty to businesses as well. Even if it's not great news, at least they know it's not great news.
That's true, although I'm not sure how many businesses will be happy with the news of mandatory table service being reintroduced to pubs and any venue that serves alcohol in Scotland, to the limit of 100 people indoors standing with 1 metre physical distancing, something that people noted with some sad mirth, that nightclubs would have to have, technically could still be open, but everyone would have to stand a metre apart and only 100 people in. It's a very peculiar set of circumstances, and to some it looks fairly contradictory, especially when we know that Omicron is spreading really quite quickly and that these measures will not be introduced until the 26th and the 27th of December. The big mixing day of the 25th of December will still go ahead in England, in Wales, in Scotland and likely in Northern Ireland. And what many epidemiologists and what many scientific and medical advisors across the United Kingdom are saying is that actually that's the danger point. That intergenerational mixing point is the danger point, the point when lots of people in their 20s and 30s have caught COVID in the last week. If they go and see their elderly relatives, that is the point 2 or 3 weeks later where the NHS could really feel some pressure. But every single nation in the United Kingdom, as far as we know, is letting that go ahead, almost paying for that with more draconian restrictions for a longer amount of time afterwards. It's a curious place to find ourselves in.
Well, I mean, it probably plays into the whole point of trying not to cancel Christmas, even if that does come at a cost. And we should just say the Press Association in the last couple of minutes have said that Stormont ministers in Northern Ireland are going to introduce new restrictions. This is that they're going to close nightclubs. They're going to bring back in the rule of 6 for hospitality, guidance on limited household mixing, and that there will be capacity once again for retailers and one-way systems and screening. So nightclubs going to close again in Northern Ireland. This is from the 27th, I think, the 27th of December.
Very similar to Wales. Wales also, of course, the rule of 6, the one-way systems, the guidance for households, but this is a day later in Northern Ireland compared to Wales.
I suppose the big question is, away from Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland's got its own particular circumstances, not least of all that it shares a border, of course, with the rest of Ireland. But many people have suggested that Mark Drakeford and Nicola Sturgeon have been playing politics in some ways during this pandemic, always seeming to be more cautious than Westminster. Is that still the sense? Or is this them kind of listening to the scientists when Boris essentially politically can afford to?
I think this is probably less playing politics, less trying to show up Boris Johnson, and more just a fundamental difference in ideology. Different people of different parties may place greater or lesser weight on the idea of precaution, on the idea of the costs, both economic and social, of restrictions, as well as the benefits of restrictions. And depending on your view, you may weight those different elements to a different extent. And in a cost-benefit analysis, you may put the same things in the same columns, but give more weight to various sides, depending on where you come from in the political spectrum. But the thing I find peculiar about this is quite clearly Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford have similar ideas about what they should be doing. I think peculiar ideas, given they're letting Christmas go ahead and then making the next 3 weeks pretty miserable for everyone. But it's odd to see the different parts of the United Kingdom having very different rules to achieve the same ends. It would have made a much more sensible situation if they'd sort of all sat down together and tried to do something much more uniformly. Because, of course, we're going to see the situation where people living in border towns are going to be leaving Wales to go to England for their New Year's celebration, are going to be leaving Scotland to go to Northern England for their New Year's celebrations as well.
Yeah, indeed. Well, of course, health is a devolved matter, but you're right, different nations taking different approaches. Tom, thank you very much indeed. Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, with the latest there on what's happening across the UK. That announcement just in the last couple of minutes that Northern Ireland is going to essentially follow Wales to a large degree with the reintroduction of the rule of 6, one-way systems and capacity controls in shops, and the closing of nightclubs from December 27th. Let's go back to Scotland now, though, because as we heard yesterday, Nicola Sturgeon has imposed tight restrictions on hospitality and sports events, with outdoor sporting events limited to 500 spectators from Boxing Day. This decision has faced a huge backlash from football clubs around the country, with clubs facing huge financial pressures. There are also fixtures in the Scottish Premier League set to go ahead tonight at full capacity, which has caused confusion on why the limit of attendance will only come into play on the 26th. Well, today's senior clinical advisor to the Scottish Government, Jason Leach, admitted that there was zero science behind the limit of 500 spectators, but said that there'd been a line drawn somewhere. Well, joining me to discuss this is the Scottish football journalist, Robbie Hanratty. Robbie, very good afternoon to you, and also joined by YouTuber Gordon Bonnes. Thank you, gentlemen. First of all, we'll start with you, Robbie. No science involved in all of this, but clearly the government feel that they need to do something to stop the spread of this new variant.
Yeah, and I think it's drawing that line between putting public health first and scapegoating football, and it always seems to be things such as football that is the scapegoat. And for me, football is nothing without fans. I'm a sports journalist. I'll go to as many games as I can as a spectator or as a journalist, and just that eerie feeling that no one wants to come back. And yesterday, when that announcement was made by the First Minister, it just felt like a sense of deja vu, I guess. And when Jason Leach is coming out and saying that there's nothing really to back that up, then no wonder people are angry.
And Jason, Gordon, is your view that football fans share that sentiment, that they are pretty angry about that almost football fans are being picked upon, or sports fans?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, I think there'll be a very short minority that will not be feeling that. I mean, there is reason why. I believe that Nicola Sturgeon will be thinking that critics will be believing that, well, they'll be watching every move she makes. So there is a sense of maybe she's being a bit overcautious. However, she doesn't want to be known as the First Minister that basically got Scotland completely covered in COVID. But for me, the announcement is the latest kick in the stones, if you pardon my expression, for football fans who have done everything they can to abide by any previous request by the government. For example, I've been double vaxxed, I've had my booster, and to be told that we're basically back into lockdown again for God knows how long, because they say it's going to be for a couple of weeks, but we know that there's going to be a very big possibility that there's going to be longer than that. So we can only guess how long this is going to be.
I've never had a kick in the stones, but I can guess what it means, Gordon. Robbie, just in regards to the evidence behind this, as you say, a line in the sand on the 500 figure, but I think also one of the things that has fed into the discussion is that obviously when you've got thousands of fans in an open stadium, might be fine, but they have to get often trains or trams or buses to venues, and then also there's a reliance on the emergency services to be there just through the sheer quantity of people, and they're under strain because lots of them are falling ill or having to take time off because of isolation. So there is a genuine thought process behind this about the strain that it puts on the rest of society.
Yeah, definitely. You've got to see that side of the coin, that this lockdown, they'll try to do it for people's best interests, as the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, always tries to say, that they don't take things lightly. But for me, the concern I think a lot of football fans will have, and I personally have as a journalist, is that they say this could be 3 weeks, but we all seen last year with the circuit breaker in Glasgow, it was meant to only be 16 days and ended up almost 9 months. And football, especially mental health for football and for football fans getting to the football, is a massive thing. So for them not to get that for so long, it's certainly not one that if I was a football fan and that was my only release, I would be really worried going into the next however long of this period. But for you, as you suggest to me, that the NHS, that's the priority, I guess, for these governments. They've got to protect it. So they're making these measures on the best interests of what they think for the public.
OK, Robbie and Gordon, thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Some disgruntled Scottish football fans, of course, with those rules coming into play from Boxing Day. Well, we've heard, of course, from Conservative MPs this afternoon, many of them saying that they do not see the need for new restrictions. That is not necessarily shared by the Labour Party. A little bit earlier on GB News, we spoke to Shadow Cabinet Minister John Ashworth about whether there should be further restrictions.
Boris Johnson, if he was going to have introduced anything over Christmas, he missed his window of opportunity because he sort of divvied and delayed. So, as it happens, I think because the British people have been sensible and they are showing leadership themselves, it does look like the infection rates have plateaued over the last couple of days. It's still a high level infection, of course. Let's watch those infection rates like a hawk. I think the issue now, though, is that everybody is anticipating that something will happen after Christmas. Indeed, that's the briefing from the government sources to newspapers. Briefings to newspapers isn't good enough. I think businesses who need to order stock for post-Christmas in the run-up to New Year's Eve need clarity. We all need to know where we stand. So we'll urge Boris Johnson to outline what he anticipates comes next. We'd all understand it if he says we think we need to do X, Y, and Z, and then when we get to after Christmas, he says, actually, it doesn't look like it's needed after all. But I think people just need a sense of direction. Instead, we get more sort of divvy and delay from the Prime Minister. I think people just need to know where they stand. I mean, we're in the worst of all worlds at the moment, that we know that we've got a Christmas, we don't have restrictions, but businesses don't know where they stand post-Christmas. And of course, a lot of businesses in the hospitality sector, restaurants, bars, have taken a real hammering this week or so because people have restricted their interactions. The financial package that was announced isn't going to go far enough to support a lot of businesses, and it's certainly not going to support those workers who are going to lose hours, who if they're on 0 hours contracts or their hours are cut back, they're going to lose wages. And I think we just need some clarity about what the financial package will be and what the restrictions are likely to look like post-Christmas in the run-up to New Year's Eve. We can't leave people in limbo. We just need that certainty from the Prime Minister today. A map, if you like. And remember, when we came into winter, before we knew about this variant, we had the Plan A and the Plan B map. And the government said, look, if things get worse, we can move to Plan B. And this is what Plan B looks like, masks on in shops and so on. So that principle of setting out options for the next stage so people know what the next stage looks like is one that has been established by the government. And we're just asking the government to give people certainty about what the next stage could be. And at the moment, though, I take the point you are making, but look at the newspapers. There's all kinds of briefings from government insiders and sources in government saying, well, we've saved Christmas, but New Year's Eve is going to be stuffed. That's not good enough. That's not fair to pubs and restaurants and theatres and so on in my constituency here in Leicester and across the country, people who have struggled this year trying to make ends meet. Christmas and the New Year period is really, really important for pubs and restaurants, and they're going to take a hit. They need a bit of a sense of where they think things are going to be post-Christmas, and that's what we're calling for.
There you go, Labour's John Ashworth speaking a little bit earlier on GB News. We've been getting you to get in touch, haven't we, about Tony Blair's comments, the former Prime Minister, earlier on today, saying that if you're not vaccinated and you're eligible, you're not just irresponsible, you're an idiot. Lots of you have been emailing in. Most, it must be said, not terribly impressed with Tony Blair. Howard says he is hurling accusations and insults at a significant proportion of the British public. Just shows what a classy statesman he really is. John says that Blair is not listening to the experts. It seems to me people just cherry pick which sound bites they want to echo. And Laura says it is the definition of idiocy and is the leader of irresponsibility. No one cares what he thinks. Martin White also got in touch via Twitter saying, please show more balance in your views on Omicron and restrictions now or what is planned. I don't think you are at the moment. Always get in touch. Want to hear your views? There's the email address, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet us at GBNews. Well, that is it for the briefing for today. Join me again at 3 tomorrow. It is the last one before Christmas. We'll try and ensure some festive cheer. Tom is back at 9 a.m. and 12 tomorrow. Up next, it is Alex with the afternoon agenda. Stay tuned for that. But first, let's go to Exeter, the Met Office, and the weather.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again, good afternoon. Well, we've got a change underway now across the UK with some rain pushing in. As it bumps into the colder air across Scotland, we've got a risk of some ice here, but generally speaking, over the next few days, it's breezier and less cold, at least in the south. Now, the milder air is tied in with these weather fronts pushing their way in from the Atlantic, which is dislodging the area of high pressure that's been with us for the last few days and setting the scene for a more changeable and unsettled theme for the next few days. Got rain then pushing its way northwards across Scotland this evening. The nice risk are tied in with this and perhaps some snow across the mountains of northern Scotland as well. Elsewhere, though, the rain will sweep through and then we're left with a lot of cloud around, a few clear spells, but on the whole, quite cloudy skies to end the night. And it won't be as cold as it was last night. An early dip in temperatures across some eastern areas of England, but generally speaking, those temperatures coming up from the southwest as we start Thursday. So we've got quite a wet start, though, across parts of Scotland through Thursday. The rain here will tend to peter out for a time before it gets caught up by this next band of rain working its way in from the southwest. Not much rain across England and Wales, I don't think, from this, but certainly for parts of northern England, perhaps Northern Ireland, certainly for Scotland, quite a wet day to come with quite persistent rain by the afternoon and potentially some more snow developing across the mountains of Scotland. Milder in the south, but colder elsewhere still. Then a wet night to come for Thursday night into Friday. Potentially quite significant amounts of snow across the mountains of Scotland, so something to bear in mind if you're travelling in this part of the world. Elsewhere, though, it will be largely dry to take us into Christmas Eve morning, although with some clear skies and a now damp ground, best before some fog patches to develop. Quite a mild night, though, certainly in comparison to many recent nights, temperatures staying in double figures towards the southwest. So Christmas Eve will start off on a fairly grey and murky note, perhaps some dense fog patches, which will be slow to clear across central southern parts of England on Christmas Eve. Next batch of rain, though, waiting in the wings. This sets the scene then for quite an unsettled Christmas period, with certainly a risk of some rain across many parts of the country at times, and with temperatures quite low in the north, there's a chance of some snow too.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with